and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 204. Today we're going to be talking about a steampunk shoot that I did. Viji's also sent in a picture for feedback, so lots to take a look at. Stick around. Now, if you happen to be watching live, it's going out live or here on YouTube, then leave a comment down below. Say hello, tell me who you are, tell me where you're from, tell me what the weather's doing, and get the chat going, and we can make a start. So yes, welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Like I said, episode 204. Today we're going to be talking about a steampunk shoot that I did. So, I suppose, well, actually, I'll tell you what, before we start, I can see we've got a couple of comments in already, so let's say hello to a few people. So Robert from Texas, Robert Gullick says, howdy all from a hot, sunny Texas, preparing our photos for the Texas State Fair. Welcome, Robert, glad you could make it along. Meg says, hello, everyone. John Harvey says, good day, everyone. Looking forward to this episode because I really like shooting steampunk. Excellent. Well, I hope I have some good tips for you then. Susan says, hello from a rather cloudy and decidedly chilly Kakubri. It's not exactly summery, and this is true. Kakubri being just a few miles down the road, it's not particularly warm. It's about 15 degrees centigrade out there. So yeah, Celsius rather. Yeah, it feels kind of a bit more like April than it does August, it has to be said. April says, greetings from a mostly cloudy Long Island, New York. Nadia joins us from a very cloudy Fife and says hi. And Marilyn says, hello from a hot and wildfiery Colorado. Wildfire. Well, I hope you're safe there, Marilyn. Right, okay, so, yes, steampunk. What do we mean by steampunk? So for those who aren't familiar with it, I don't know whether everybody currently watching is, or there might be people watching back, because don't forget, these things are recorded. So if you're not watching live, or you have to run off halfway through, you can always come back and watch the recordings. But it does, of course, mean you can't kind of type in and join in the conversations live, which is always a fun part of turning up on a Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. UK time. But yes, steampunk. Steampunk is a genre, it's retrofuturism. Now, maybe you feel none the wiser for that. But what that means is the idea, if it's sort of science fiction, but a past view of what science fiction would be. So you're in here is, think Star Trek. Star Trek was a science fiction program. Star Trek, the original series, made back in the 1960s, with Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and all that. And it was set a few hundred years in the future, but when you watch it now, it is so obviously of its time. It was made in the 1960s, so it has 1960s technology, or what they think the tech. I'm fine, they've got spaceships, but those spaceships aren't powered by digital computers. They're powered by, if anything, analog computers, and things tend to be lots of brightly coloured buttons which you press, rather than screens which you touch. So the technology itself, as we experience it, has grown way beyond a lot of what Star Trek was using. So Star Trek's idea of futurism, now when we look at it, becomes a kind of retrofuturism. So if you were designing the idea of science fiction, but based on a kind of 1960s aesthetic, that's a form of retrofuturism now. Of course, at the time, it was just futurism. Now, if we take that idea and we wind it back further, if you go back to the old black and white Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers ideas, these things, then they tended to be built in, there was lots of steel and there was lots of rivets and there was lots of levers and switches to flick and all the rest of it. And that was very much the kind of technology of the 1930s and 40s. So let's go back a little bit further to Victorian Edwardian Britain. So what we're talking about is late 19th century, early 20th century. So from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And this is your starting point. So that Edwardian Victorian idea of what the future would be like, Edwardian science fiction. Now, your key here, if you think about particular authors like Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Victorian classic, the idea of a submarine that travels around the world, not surfacing, dealing with, but it's built with this idea of technology that was beyond what the Victorians had at the time, but they could imagine. And then you go to H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells, whether it's War of the Worlds and Invaders from Mars, or whether H.G. Wells' Time Machine. You had a time machine. Now, time machines weren't possible, but when you look at the kind of idea of what a time machine would be, Again, it's not built with digital computers and flux capacitors and what have you. It's made with lots of polished wood and brass and levers. And so if you think about the technology of around then, when you had trains were like the big industrial idea, steam engines, the steam engines that drove the whole kind of industrial revolution, right? So you've got steam, and the idea of steampunk then, it was a term coined back during I think it was probably 1970s, 1980s. There was graphic novels, comic books that were using this aesthetic, this idea of the kind of Edwardian adventurer, Victorian. So pirates, buccaneers, time travellers, space travellers, but with this Edwardian Victorian aesthetic to it. So the women are wearing sort of corsets and petticoats, and the men are all wearing waistcoats and formal jackets. Only they would then change this by somebody wearing a top hat, but he would have welder's glasses on the top, and he would have, so this really is what the aesthetic is about. And this aesthetic has sort of grown, and there's little pockets of places where people are really into their steampunk. So much like superhero conventions, or comic book conventions, or Star Trek conventions, or Star Wars conventions, where people like to get their costumes, dress up, become their favourite characters. Some people will just make minor play towards it. Some people will go to the nth degree, creating these most incredibly elaborate costumes to be either a character that they know and love from their movies or books, or creating their own characters. And steampunk tends to embody this. You get people who can go really and have a lot of fun making up these outfits. So that's what steampunk is. Now, so what's my involvement with steampunk here? Essentially what happened was a few months back, Andrea, who's the commissioning editor of Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine, got in contact with me to say, have I got a photo shoot for you if you want it? She'd come across Ben and Louisa, who operate the Courtyard, which is a place in Annan, a town about 30 miles up the road from here. And Ben's a leather worker, and Lou is... seamstress seems like the wrong word, but basically she can make pretty much anything out of material and stitch and everything else. And they have a kind of haberdashery, but also a place where Ben fixes shoes and makes stuff. But they've also been making some steampunk outfits. They also do Viking reenactment as well. And they're very on. Ben's often making leather bottles and pouches and everything, and they're stitching together. So, that 9th century Viking, Saxons, Celts, those kind of reenactment things they do. But they'd also got into steampunk. And one of the big things with that they'd done is Ben had made this incredible leather dragon. Roughly about this big. Okay, wingspan of about this. And Andrea had seen it in the window. And it was breathing fire. Well, it wasn't breathing fire. It looked like it was breathing fire. It was breathing smoke. But it had a couple of little LED yellow lights tucked into the cheeks, so that there was a little orange glow in the mouth as the smoke came out of it. And she thought this was brilliant. Went in, started talking to them, realised she wanted to do an article on them for Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine. Got in touch with me and said, right, okay, could you do a photo shoot with them? So this sounded like a huge amount of fun. I also at this point had Spring Fling coming up just a month or two away for me, and I was looking for another interesting photo that I could print up and stick on the wall to show people who would come and visit the studio space that I was using. So this then involved me getting in contact with Ben and Louisa to talk about the idea of doing a photo shoot with them. And part of it was a Viking shoot, but the bit that I'm focusing on today is the notion of the steampunk shoot. Because what I really wanted to do with the steampunk was, the thing is with steampunk, I've got a sympathy for it, and much like John, I kind of enjoy the aesthetic of it. But whenever I look at steampunk photos, they always look like people in costumes. Which is what they are, of course, but I never feel convinced by it. It's a bit like if you see somebody dressed up as Princess Leia from Star Wars, you know it's somebody. You don't go, oh, that is Princess Leia. You go, that's somebody dressed up as Princess Leia. And given the intense love and passion that these people have for steampunk and the nth degree they will go to create these outfits, there's a lot of appallingly bad photography or very mediocre photography about. And there's given, again, in their heads, they are the hero or heroine or villain of their own epic movie. Where's the photography to go with it? I just never see good steampunk photography beyond here's a picture of somebody dressed in a costume. And I thought, if I'm going to do a picture for Dumfries and Galloway Life or a set of pictures, I want to do something which looks cinematic, actually really looks the part, where you do kind of fall in. So to employ all my skills of narrative photography, cinematic photography, that's where I wanted to go with this. Now, I knew they would have the outfits. I chatted with them beforehand about what we could do. But the big problem was going to be where. Because if you take a photo of somebody all dressed up in steampunk, but they just happen to be on the high street and there's people in ordinary clothes walking behind them, or there's electric lights and modern day stuff, it's going to look out of place. It's not going to be convincing. So we needed something that either had a sort of Victorian or Edwardian look to it, or had some kind of aesthetic to it. And the great thing here was that it turned out that they were practically next door to Solway Spirits, which is a gin distillery. And this gin distillery had these stills which were kind of brass and metal and what have you. And so this is then what we decided to photograph. They allowed us to use that as a set on a day when they weren't going to be doing any distilling that day. So they let us into the space, and I was able to set up lights and have a smoke machine, and Ben and Louisa dressed up in their outfits, and we gathered all sorts of stuff together and created the shoot. And that's what I'm going to be talking about to you today. All right, I was going to say, it looked like there's a couple more comments here, but it's actually Nadia chatting about coming down this way. Well, actually, Nadia, if you're coming down this way, I'm only 9,000 miles down the road from Susan, so yeah, keep in touch. That would be good. So, a little bit conversation going on there, right? Okay, so to go back to the steampunk shoot then. So, I'll tell you what, let's throw up a photo. And what I'll do first of all is I'll show you the final image, the one that I ended up getting printed up to stick on. There we go. Here we go here. So this then is the kind of final shot, and what we've got here is we've got Louisa and Ben. We've got all this brass and silver. Or metal rather, and here's the fire-breathing dragon. Okay, now the dragon came about because Ben had been down at Whitby in Yorkshire, and where there'd been a steampunk weekend down there, and they'd been down a couple of years, I think, and one year they went down there, or last year or something like that, they'd gone down there, and Ben was telling me that he'd noticed a growth in the number of familiars, which basically like little creatures people would have sitting on their shoulders. So it might be a parrot if they were being a pirate, think that. And he said he came across this wonderful, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but this little animatronic thing that this woman had sitting on her shoulder. The woman herself was also in a wheelchair, but down in her lap she had this little kind of operating gizmo, and she could essentially get this thing to turn its head and blink its eyes and move its mouth, and lots of kids were just absolutely fascinated by this, and adults too for that matter. And then I think Ben had been chatting to Louisa, who said she'd love to have a dragon sitting on her shoulder, and Ben had gone away and done some research, and he found a pattern, and then out of leather, because he's just an incredible leather worker, he'd made this dragon. But then to go beyond making the dragon, he got a smoke machine, and he had a tube running up through it so that it belched out smoke, and then he put lights inside the mouth, so you got this orange glow with it too. And so this was kind of what, where we're up to. So we created this scene here. Other shots we did in the same set. This one here was, you can see the same set here, same dragon, but in this one, Ben's wearing this leather coat, and he made this leather coat, which was quite incredible. For those who are, into their gaming and what have you, Assassin's Creed. Think Assassin's Creed. He essentially based this leather coat on the idea of an Assassin's Creed. And so that was another one of his kind of creations. And so we kind of created that. What what else did we do? Yes, then I did a couple of kind of close-up shots, because now I've got to think Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine, and so we're wanting to get a close-up of the dragon itself. And here we go, we've got the dragon, so Ben's behind, slightly out of focus, and I kind of fell in love with the way that the smoke, if for whatever reason here, was sort of almost pulsing and kind of created this sort of wonderful shape coming out of here. Another shot here, same kind of idea, slightly different angle. This one here was then me designing the idea of an A4 page. So I'm thinking magazine, and in fact actually partly what I'm thinking of this is the idea of, if you wanted, you could make this into a cover shot. You could do like so. I put together a mock, I sent it through to Andrea. She didn't use it, unfortunately, which was a shame. But this idea that what you're doing is you're leaving enough space at the top for a logo, if you want it, and space around it to put other bits of information. Now, this never happened. This is entirely a false mock-up. But sometimes I send these things to Andrea, and on one or two occasions, she's actually gone for it. She's the picture I've done like that, she's ended up using as a cover for the magazine. So this is partly, this talk here, this little snippet here is about the idea of understanding that when you're sometimes designing photos, you know, knowing where they're going to appear, you can design and do versions of a photo which will work in a particular context. So whether it's working as a cover of a magazine or a double page spread, something like that. So these were the kind of the key ones, and I think I did another one like this. Yeah, this was just a bit of fun for Louisa, where she's actually got the dragon on her shoulder, and it does look like it's kind of breathing fire somewhat. So these were the photos that I was creating, and it was a lot of fun. And Ben and Louisa were just brilliant, completely up for it, and we were able to kind of play around and create these different things. Now. They ended up in Dumfries and Galloway Life. And actually, even before that, the month before the article appeared, there was a steampunk weekend happening down in Kirkcudbright, a much, much lower level than the one in Whitby. But Dumfries and Galloway Life had a page where they were mentioning it, and they used that very picture that I showed you into this, because there's a gap. They could do a nice bit of writing in the corner here. So although this one didn't get used as a cover shot, they did, you know, the design of it, the layout of it, lent itself to promoting that event, because the event itself hadn't actually managed to get much in the way of photos out to promote it. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through, what I'm going to talk you through now is I'll show you for essentially the editing process, because while we ended up with this photo being the final, there's a couple of other versions of this photo. One is the one that went into Dumfries and Galloway Life, which is this, which kind of looks the same, but you'll notice it's a different crop. Okay, different crop, different feeling to it. This one's cinematic. This one is designed for a double page spread. And to show you what I mean, here we go. This is double page spread. Now, the key thing about the double page spread is the line that runs through the middle where it's folded. Okay, and in my original cinematic, no, not that one, they're here, and where have we gone? Yeah, so double page spread here, as opposed to, the cinematic version. Now, in the cinematic version, the halfway point, the point where it would have folded, would have been right through the middle of Louisa. So this one isn't designed for the magazine, whereas this one is. I've cropped in from the side specifically to allow the fact that where the fold is doesn't go through the middle of Louisa's face. So again, understanding that notion of how a photo is going to be used, not just the fact that it's a double page spread, but that the double page spread has a fold in the middle, and you quite often lose little bits of detail. So actually in this, you can't really see her shoulder. You would have to kind of really flatten it out in order to be able to get it. Now, for somebody reading the article, it doesn't overly matter. What they're doing is they're taking in the photo, they're getting the general gist of it, and then there's the blurb and the write-up here. And then we go over the page, and what we find is here's a version of the sorry, just see it there with the jacket, and here's cut down one of the versions of Ben behind the dragon breathing smoke. This bit down here is then where they're moving on to the Viking leather goods that Ben also creates. So understanding how you crop it then becomes also a really important part of the way that you kind of structure your photo. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you essentially some of the tricks behind what the original photo looked like compared with what it ended up as. So if I'll flip over to Photoshop here, actually just change that workspace to there. Okay, so now you can see this here then is the original photo. This is as close to, I mean, there's a couple of minor tweaks in RAW, but just as I've kind of opened it, but pretty much this is kind of what was in the back of the camera. Now, it was a tight space. Although we had, we were in this distillery, this place for distilling the gin. There were some bits we could move, and there were some bits we couldn't. And this table we could move, but this sort of cauldron over on the right corner here, we couldn't. It was full of liquid and it was too heavy to move, and so we had to kind of angle the table because I wanted it sort of moving into the corner behind them rather than flat. But it also meant that I was limited to where I could put the lights. And what I've got here, this is a 3-light setup. So if anybody now is interested in how I set the lighting up, this is how I've done it. You can see I've got a softbox, gridded softbox up in the corner here. Okay, but it was unfortunately impossible to not have it peeking into the camera. So I made sure it was at the very least leaving a bit of a gap between this and where the pipe came out the top of the still here, so that I could remove it in Photoshop afterwards. Then I wanted to have another light. I wanted a sort of semi-backlight going on, and behind here I've got an off-camera flash with an orange gel and a little kind of barrier reflector thing to one side of it, because I was trying to stop it lighting up the wall behind too much, but I also wanted it directing here. Unfortunately, it crept into view, and there wasn't many places behind, because this still was quite close to the wall, there wasn't many places I could put it. So again, I've got it tucked in as close as I can with the idea that maybe I can remove it afterwards. And then finally, I wanted a bit of light coming from the front. So just over my shoulder to the left is another off-camera flash with a blue gel on it. And you can see the reflections then in the so that's creating all these reflections in the style of the metalwork here, lighting up the dragon a bit, lighting up the front of the table. And so that's our 3-light setup. Big softbox over on the right has a kind of key light, yellow backlight, side light over here, and then there's blue light coming from the front to fill in the details and add atmosphere. So blue-yellow kind of aesthetic going on. Now, as you can see, this is quite different from the finished product. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through the different layers. So the first thing that I had to do, well, actually, one of the first things I did is, just as a bit of fun, I noticed down here on the writing bit on here, it says UPwKA Premium since 1961. And 1961 obviously is the steampunk, so I changed that to 1861. And that took a little bit of layers and playing around and finding an 8 to stick in there and playing with the hue saturation of it and the curves and all what have you. So I found an 8, put that in, and that's one of these kind of tiny little details that nobody else is really going to notice. But in a way is part of, I think, the enjoyment of being a creative. You know, you do this kind of thing, and these little details, you can point them out to somebody, or somebody might, if somebody stumbles across it, then they suddenly feel this little joy of that they found something that most other people haven't. So I decided to go with the 1861 rather than 1961. Then we needed to get rid of this, And so actually what I used for that was I did the generative fill. I tried bits of copying and pasting and it wasn't really working, but in the end the generative fill, I played around with a couple of versions of that, and that managed to give me the take back the corner with the wall. It took a few iterations because it wasn't always lining up and I was getting bits of odd still kind of sticking over here, but eventually I found the one that I wanted. Then, where I've got that, I decided to just give it a bit of a vignette before we moved on to the next level. Now the next thing I wanted to do, I noticed, was there was this bit of the table down here, which is a kind of little shelving unit under the metal table, and the way the light was catching it, because it was a white piece of metal, it just kind of felt like it was grabbing my attention and putting it away, so that I had to get rid of that. And again, in the end, after trying to playing around with the copy and pasting and rubber tools and sorry, I've suddenly forgotten the name of the clone stamp tool, that's it, and having problems, in the end I also ended up using a little bit of the generative fill to get rid of it. Next thing I noticed was they have a green feather they've got this little three-cornered hat as well, which another kind of steampunk thing which Louisa sometimes wears. This time she was wearing the bowler hat, but she had this cap, and they put it there as another kind of thing to have on the table, and that was fine, except for the fact that green just looked out of place. And I played around with colour shifting the feather, making it purple, making it blue, making it red, trying different things out, and all that happened was it kept getting in the way. It kept drawing my attention, so I wanted to get rid of that. Now, particularly difficult here is it runs over the back of Ben's waistcoat and shirt and the back of his trousers and the edge of that, the handle there on the still. And again, after playing around and messing about with it for a while, I found generative fill did it. And again, a few versions of it until I managed to get the version of it that I actually wanted. So I'm finding this generative fill really useful. It's cutting down vast amounts of time from cloning tiny little bits of one bit of the picture in order to remove something. The next thing that I had was we put some of these glass bottles. There was a glass bottle sitting on there, but they just kind of felt a bit empty. So I thought what I wanted to do was add a bit of liquid to it. So I kind of found a bit of liquid, played around again, and just sort of putting something into here, and that sort of worked. Sort of added something a bit, but I then came back to that afterwards, and you'll see. So now what I do is I kind of consolidate. So let's come back to here. So I've consolidated all these kind of base bits, and then I've gone in and I've done a kind of a general brighten it up, play around with the levels, play around with the clarity tool, and we end up, now we're kind of moving into the realm where you go, okay, this is starting to really look like it's got something to it. The next thing I wanted to do, I wanted to go back. I wasn't quite happy with the completely empty liquid, so I went back and did more liquid with it. And within this, I think I probably also ended up using probably a generative fill type thing to get the liquid in there. Then there was the notion of, there was an empty bottle over here, and I thought what would be quite fun, it would be to have like an octopus or a squid or something in there. So I found an old picture that I had of an octopus, and managed to just kind of faintly squeeze it into here. And by playing around with the layers and also giving it a slight, because it was a black and white photo, and gave it a sort of slight colour tint and what have you, so give it a slightly purplish tint to it, just to kind of almost like it's reflecting off a bit of the guy's shirt behind. So that just became like another little element of interest. So that what's happening here is there, with the photo like this, you've got your first glance where you notice two people standing at the table, but then as you go into it and you start looking around, there's all these little details, and these little details, which are the bit that I find really fun when doing a construction like this. So we've now got our octopus, but now we've got the point that I've noticed we've got the light coming out of here, but it's not necessarily grabbing much attention. We've also got, Ben here filled up this bottle with smoke coming out. He just actually placed it almost like a bottle under a tap faucet, filled it with smoke coming out from the dragon. and filled this bottle. I will also say I've got my own little smoke machine, which I've talked about before, and we filled the space, but that's why there's sort of smoke kicking about. Part of it's coming from the dragon, but part of it I've given a couple of little bursts of my own smoke machine to really kind of fill the room a little bit more. Ben's got this thing of smoke here, so I thought, well, okay, what if we added a glow to it? So here's what here I've done, I've added this kind of glow, and so a yellow glow added onto that, added onto the dragon as well. But in addition to that, what I've done is I've added in a little bit of extra reflection into the goggles and the spectacles that these two are wearing. So if I take those away, you can see they're just sort of looking black. But by doing that, it just sort of adds a little bit more life into it. You know, like I've talked before about with portraits, you need to have catch lights. If you don't have catch lights in the eyes just look kind of dead. So we can't see the eyes behind the thing, but having the sort of making it look like you've got catch lights coming from the glowing bottle really just sort of lifts and makes it add that little bit of extra life. It makes them feel like real people. There's life going on here. Next layers, what have we got? So yeah, that's right. So now I start playing around with it. Again, I figure it's a bit too dark, it's a bit too bright around. I want to draw attention into the middle of the picture, so I darken it around the edges. I then play around with the levels because I want to brighten up the center. And then I'm doing a very slight hue saturation shift on the dragon, which felt slightly too purpley blue, and I gave it just a very slight shifted the blue slightly, and then kind of we consolidate it all by just kind of polishing. Where are we? Where have I gone? Oh, I managed to kind of undo everything there. It doesn't matter. Okay, so we've reached this level. Next thing, so this is kind of where I'd got to. Sorry, let's just move that in there again. Now within this, what I will also point out is what I've done is I have a couple of crop ratio ideas in here so this was the idea of thinking if I wanted a cinematic crop ratio, I could start like that. If I wanted the double page spread, that was giving me. So, so the double page spread, which ended up here, you can see I've outlined there. So what I've done here is on a separate sheet, I've created what would be an A3 ratio and then placed it on here. And then that allowed me to kind of move it back and forth and sort of see where it would be so that I could get the center line in the middle, and trying to whether I kind of zoom in or zoom out a bit to make sure that I'm still getting enough bits of the metal drums around it, and allowing also for the 3mm bleed. Right? If you're ever doing anything for print, for magazines, for postcards, for flyers, for anything like that, and the picture is going to be going to the edge of the page, you have to allow an extra 3mm around it, which might get cropped off. Okay, so I'm sure I've talked about that before, and we can come back to that again in the future. So I added in these different crop ratios of what I might also do with it, because what I also wanted to do was I knew I was going to create some postcards out of this as well. And in fact, here we go, postcard. I will come back to that in a minute. Okay, so those are crop ratios that I wanted to talk about. So from that, I then created the pictures went off to Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine. They ended up in the magazine. This is what was shown. But then we had the cropped, the A4, the A3 crop double page spread of this. But we also had the cinematic crop, which is what I used, which is what I printed up to have for Spring Fling. So that's where we were at with that. We got as far as that. Okay, so a couple of comments here. Meg says, is it easy or hard to do the photo shoot? It's hard, it's difficult, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have to be fun. Part of the fun of being a photographer is the challenge of doing the photo shoot. And this is it, is that everybody gets a thrill out of different aspects of challenge. Some people love the challenge of wildlife photography, of trying to capture something which is inherently moving, difficult, doesn't want to interact with you, you can't chat to, finding the space. Some people love to do street photography, where you are working with other kinds of elements, or landscape photography, where you're working with weather patterns. And everybody, whatever kind of photo shoot you are pursuing, there are challenges involved. Sometimes those challenges are really frustrating because they prevent you from getting where you want to go. And then at that point, it feels super hard, and in fact, it feels too hard. But sometimes you put in all the work, you put in the effort, and something goes right. And that's when it's fun, and it's a lot of fun. And that gives you the energy and desire and drive to carry on doing it and to pursue new things. So it's never easy, and if it was easy, to be honest, I would be bored with it. I wouldn't be that interested in doing it. Part of what keeps me engaged is the challenge. It's the challenge which is part of the driving force behind my desire to carry on doing photography. Susan says, did you consider different coloured gels, not just the blue? Yes, there's all, well, what happens is there's a kind of a first thought and a second thought, and yeah, I could have gone for others, but in the end I had this notion of a kind of blue yellow or blue orange kind of feel, really. Those two colours tend to work really quite well together. If I'd say gone for blue and green, that wouldn't have worked so well, or a part of it was that the dragon was blue, and that the article that was being written about it was about the fact that it was a blue dragon. And at the time, he's since sold the dragon, but the dragon was sitting in the front of the window, and it was blue. And so what I was really needing, if I'd had a colour that was, say I'd done green or I'd done red, that would have kind of interfered with the blue colour. So by having the blue at the front to make sure it's capturing the dragon, that kind of felt best. And briefly, yes, my mind does a quick run through all the colours and then it settles. Sometimes I've done things where I've done the shot and then realised the colour isn't right and I've swapped it around. Sometimes I do it and I go, yes, it feels right. So in that case, I decided to keep it to the blue. John says, intriguing, steampunk in a steampunk setting. My mind is thinking of having a steampunk only studio setting. That would be fun to set up. Yeah, again, kind of looks to what, depending on what you're getting. What was also fun at the steampunk weekend in Kakubri was there was somebody who was doing tin type photography, and it's a bit like collodion photography. It's an old style of thing where you are coating a piece of tin with the silver gelatin or silver nitrate or whatever it is, and then developing it, and it becomes a complete one-off. And he was using an old camera with an old lens, so his camera equipment was 120 years old and had this beautiful lens. And so when he took these photos, they looked exactly like a kind of late Victorian, early Edwardian photo with exactly the right kind of bokeh that you wanted. And it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful to look at. Much harder to fake it in Photoshop. So those worked for being period pieces. What I was doing, knowing that I couldn't do that, was to try and make it look like a movie, to do a cinematic style. Right, okay, so with that in mind, where was I going to go? Yes, now, I then went on to make a couple of extra small changes. Based on some of the feedback, a couple of comments I got about the picture that I'd done. Okay, actually, I just saw Robert's written something, and I'll come back to this. I completely agree with you about steampunk photography. It usually looks like costume photography instead of immersion into a world. You've captured that perfectly. Thank you. I'm glad you feel that, Robert. So yes, that's exactly what I was trying to do. So coming back to the pictures, and if we come back to this. So this was the photo. I printed it up. I've done everything else. When I had it up at Spring Fling, or rather, yes, that's right, on the run up to Spring Fling, and I'd shown this to a few people, and I kept getting a particular piece of feedback to it, which was it looked like this pole was kind of going through to the pipe was going through his head too soon, too quickly, and it just looked slightly wrong, like it's coming out of his goggles here and running down. And so it felt like the pipe was just in the wrong place. And while at the time I'd been taking the photo, I hadn't worried about this, and a lot of people looking at this haven't worried about this. Some people had noticed it. And it wasn't just one, it was two, three, I can't remember if I got four, but I certainly had at least 3 pieces of feedback where people latched onto that. And so I thought, okay, maybe I need to change this. And then there was another thing, which is I decided I was going to do postcards, right? So I do postcards of a lot of my work, and they're business cards. On the back, I have logo, I have contact details, and I have social media, stuff like that. And I use them as business cards. I hand them out to people. I discovered a long time ago that business cards get looked at once, logged in a drawer and forgotten about. But postcards tend to get put on mantelpieces, stuck to the fridge or the wall, used as bookmarks. In which case they have a longevity. People are constantly being reinforced. My brand, if you like, is being reinforced in their minds all the time. It helps me stick in their minds later better. Plus, there's loads of room to scribble notes on the back as well. Very occasionally, they are even used as postcards. Who would have thought? But for the postcard, though, I realised that when I shrunk this image down. So let's flip back into here, and when you make this image smaller, actually, it's quite easy for the dragon to get lost. You don't necessarily notice the dragon quite so much. And I started thinking, well, now, everything else had been about a blue dragon. So I'd kept it blue for the magazine and for the Spring Fling. But I thought for the postcard, I need this to stand out a little bit more. So what I did was I then started playing around with colour shifts. And ultimately, where I got to, where are we? Was I decided to go for a purple dragon. Okay, and now I played around, I played around a lot with this. I was playing around with the idea because if I made it red, then it got, it grabbed too much attention. If I made it green, the colour didn't really fit in. There was all sorts of things that I played around with, and in the end I decided to go for, now I think actually it was shifted for a fraction more over into the sort of pinky red to match. I decided to sort of match it closer to the jacket over here, or not the jacket, the shirt rather, that Ben was wearing. And so ultimately I think if I take this one and I go to where I was playing around with the blues, yeah, I think I did that and then desaturated it a little bit more, taking it into, yeah, that's actually more what it was in the print. So that I'm matching it up closer to his shirt, and then there's little bits of purple in here. And then having done that, what I also had to make sure that I did was to make sure that the reflections in the glass and a little bit kind of catching the edge into the smoke. There was a whole bunch of blue bits, like where the reflection of the dragon was, that I also needed to make sure. If you look here, you can see the blue reflections of the dragon. So I needed to make sure that they also had that same kind of slightly magenta purpley feel to it as well. And then also matched in, I did a little bit into the bottle of liquid as well, just to kind of add an extra little layer of purple so that it would fit in. And so that helped kind of stop the colour balance getting too far out, but it did mean that the dragon stood out a little bit more. And I could do that because this is just a one-off postcard. This isn't part of the set. The set, it needed to be blue because the dragon was blue in every other thing and I wasn't going to change it. And Ben had made a blue dragon. But for the postcard, I decided that we were going to have that kind of slightly purpley dragon. And so again, another decision to make sure that it worked. It's about understanding where it works within the medium it's going to be seen. So the double page spread, I've changed the crop ratio, I've changed the balance of the picture so that you can be folded in the middle, because it's understanding that's where it's going to be seen. And when it's going to be seen on a postcard where it's smaller, if I really want that dragon to stand out, but at the same time not draw all your attention away from the key aspect of it, playing around and getting the colour shift of the purple was the way that I decided to do that. So, I hope you found that interesting. where are we? Marilyn says, fascinating. April says, good idea. Nadia says, love the postcard idea. Oh, Ben. Ben's joined us. This is Ben. This is Ben who's in the photo. Lovely to see you, Ben. Says, hi, Kim. I think you removed the green feather on the tricorn hat as well. Sorry if that's already been mentioned. Just managed to tune in. Yes, you're right. I did mention that one earlier about the green feather on the hat. But yes, so say hi to Ben, folks. That's the guy who's actually there in the pictures. So yeah, delighted you could join us. So hopefully then that's giving you an insight into what the shoot was about, why the shoot came about, what I was doing, and the reasoning behind what I did, and the reasoning behind the editing choices that I made. So thank you very much to Ben, and thank you to very much and to Solway Spirits as well for lending us that space, and of course a bit to Louisa as well. So there was a really fun shoot that. Okay, a few people saying hi to Ben and a nice modelling job and what have you. So what we're going to talk about now then is quick little reminder: if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them in some way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And don't forget to subscribe, click like as well. If you haven't clicked like on the video, please do, helps the algorithms. But if you haven't done either, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the usual stuff. Right, so what I'm going to do now then is Viji has sent in a photo, and I'm going to give a little bit of feedback and critique on that. But before we get to that, Smug Points. And Robert Gullick, I hope you are still listening in and you haven't run off, because I need you to send me an email. Because when we come to the Smug Points, the accumulated Smug Points for July, Robert won, so which means he gets to choose the next challenge. So Robert, I need you to send me an email, let me know what challenge you think we should be going for. You can pick whatever topic you want, you like. It could be something you're already familiar with, so you can show off some of your photos, or it could be something you would like to know more about. And if you send me the challenge, then I will do a podcast on that topic and then set a challenge for a couple of weeks' time. So Smug Points for Ben or anybody else who happens to be listening in for the first time are points you get for contributions to the podcast. So you get 5 points just for turning up and saying hello and type something. So Ben, you actually get 5 points here just for turning up and leaving a comment. But if you decided to get involved more with the podcasts and send images in, that you get for feedback, there's 25 points for that. If you're involved in challenges, you get 10 points for sending in images or for challenges. And then we have accumulation. So if you accumulate the most Smug Points in a month, then you get to choose the next challenge. So Robert, if you could let me know that in the next day or two, that would be really useful. And then hopefully I can set that up for the next podcast. In other aspects of so where are we? And for August now, for the end of April, just to let you know, not April, for July, the runners up behind Robert were April, Sandra and Viji, who were all pretty closely bunched up. So you just kind of missed it. But we're now starting also the third quarter. Robert won the previous quarter, so we're still deciding yet on what topic, where we're going to kind of deep dive into a particular topic that he's interested in. So again, Robert, if you want to check your email back, I think I'll go into a little bit more detail with that. Right, okay, so where are we at? We've done Smug Points, we've done Steampunk Shoot. I've reminded you to buy me a coffee if you wish to support the podcast. And so now, yes, the feedback section. So feedback section, critique, this is your chance to send in an image and get direct feedback on your photo. We discuss all these different ideas of composition, of light, of technicalities, of photo shoots and all this kind of stuff. But how does that apply to your photo? So this part of the podcast is specifically given over to your chance to send me an image. You send me that image and I do my best to help you work out what you could have done differently. So you tell me your sticking points, tell me what you were trying to achieve with it, and I'll tell you the best way that you might have been able to do that, or at least give you some ideas of how you could play around with it. So with that in mind, let's move on to Viji. And Viji sent in this photo. And she said, "Hi Kim, here's a photograph I took on an elephant farm. The mahout was trying to climb, and it looked like an interesting shot. The wooden frame, here we go, down here, kind of obscures the view. If I try to remove it, the trunk and leg get cut, which doesn't look good. Is there a way to crop the picture or enhance it without affecting the effect?" Okay, so great photo. So this one I think Viji took on her phone, and it's a strong image. You know, we've got the elephant coming straight towards facing towards the camera. We've got the mahout climbing up on the side of it, the knee of the elephant lifted so that he can put his leg onto the knee before kind of pushing himself over. And it's a strong image. I think, now I don't know how much editing you've already done to it, Viji, but certainly the clouds, there's a lot of detail in the clouds. It looks like they've been edited, but it might also be the iPhone picking out the detail as well. So I'm not sure, like I say, the amount of editing you've already done, but it does look sort of edited. But yes, we are noticing this little wooden bar at the front here just takes off the tip of the toes and the trunk, and that's a shame. It is a pity. It does kind of ruin the effect a little bit. So is there anything we can do about this? Well, let's open this in Photoshop. And to tell you what, let's just close the Steampunk one now. And so here we have Viji's photo. And so first of all, well, if we just take that idea of what happens if we just crop it. So we would need to come up to here and just crop there. And yep, we've got the photo. We've removed the wooden bar, but yeah, that whole notion, as I've talked before about the notion, give it space to breathe, we've lost a bit. There's no doubt about it. It's lost, you know, it's not just not. So that's not really going to work for us. So what else can we do? Ideally, we want to sort of replace what was here. We want to have more ground in the foreground if we can, and to still have a little bit of trunk and a little bit of the feet. Now, traditionally, I think, up until probably about a year ago, the way I would have done this would have taken quite a while and a lot of playing around. So I'll duplicate that layer. And what I would have first of all done is try and get rid of this bar by using kind of the clone tool, copy and pasting, the patch tool, things like that. So what I might do, so say I kind of grab a little bit of the earth over here and I start painting it on here around on using the clone tool, something like that. Maybe getting a bit from here, starting it down here, just getting rid of bits of ground. And then with a bit of gap here, I can take the patch tool, grab that and drag it up a little bit, something like that. Make kind of quick little variations, something like that. And again here, I can take this bit, take it up. Got to be careful I don't get the chain in the way. But things like this, remove a couple of the more obvious repeated elements where you can, so that it doesn't quite look as... And now we're left with this bit in the middle. Right, and so what are we going to do with that? Now this is where it gets sort of slightly more complicated. We maybe try and remove as much as we can. Oh no, that's not really worked there. So maybe I use the clone tool. I come in and just remove kind of as much as I can to begin with, and then we kind of end up with just this bit of trunk and the foot. Now we've got this bit here, we've got a little bit of wood, it's still not working, it still doesn't quite look right. So ways we might go about it are, what I might do is I'm needing a bit more toes at the front. So what I might do is we've got toes at the back here. So if I was to say, copy that, paste that, drag this over here, so on a separate layer, and let's just kind of do a minor opacity here so I can sort of see how it lines up here. It's also smaller. So if I take this, make it a bit bigger, turn it a little bit, try and line up this toenail with that toenail so that we've got that bit of foot just in there. I think that kind of lines up there and comes over. That's quite good. So I'll make that, and then we create a mask and turn that to black and just sort of start painting out the edge of that. Take this round something like that. Now we're also not wanting to lose the trunk, so I'm going to bring the trunk back in a little bit here, so we know where the trunk got to. Okay, so we're kind of painting that bit back in. So we've now managed to kind of half rescue the toe, create something like that. But it's still not absolutely perfect. And then we've still got the trunk problem. And at that point, what I might do is something like select a piece of trunk like that. On the layer below, copy it, paste it, drag it above here. And now having this, I might kind of drag it here, and essentially try and rebuild a little bit of trunk down here. So I might start, if I go up, click that bit, I can start stretching it about the place and use an existing piece of trunk to try and shape in a curve until it sort of looks like that. I'm doing this very, very roughly, very, very quickly, but just to give you an idea of, mask that as well, of just how I might go about it. And then between it, and then take out little bits of rough there as well. And you can see we're sort of getting there. But it's a lot of work. It's already taken me 5 minutes just to do the most basic bit, and I would have to really go in and tidy this up. And I could easily spend half an hour and still not properly get it right. Having done all that now, we can go back to, let's go back to the original picture here. I will duplicate the layer. And what we have now is we have generative fill. So what I do here is, now all I need to do is take this space, and I'll bring that down to the edge of the, I want the edge of the wood. I want not too much space. I want to be as close to the original, keep as much of the original as I can, but at the same time I don't want the wood to be included, because what this generative fill is going to do, it's going to look at the spaces around the selection point. So now with the generative fill, I just hit generate and see what it comes up with, and it's going to give me 3 options, and if I don't like that, I can hit it again and see if there's any other better options. So now let's see what it's going to do. Let's just line that up. Sometimes it does them quickly, sometimes you can sort of sit there and it's like waiting for a kettle to boil, which is kind of what it feels like at the moment, so I have to keep on filling in talking. Almost there, almost there. I'm sure it didn't take this long in rehearsal. Come on. I hope it's worth it after all this. Almost there, do hang on. Or if you happen to be, there we go. Right, so there, look at that. We've got that version, or that version. And not only has it filled in the trunk and a bit of foot here and the mud, it's even given us a little bit of shadow in front of the trunk. How cool is that? I think actually of all of them, I quite like that one. I quite like the little kind of bits of dirt running around it. And I think that's now given us the job. Now we've got that, given the fact that we've got quite a bit of space above the head of the elephant, I might actually want to drag this down a little bit more and just pull that. I think so that if we kind of create this as a balance, then it gives us roughly about as much space below the trunk as there is above the head. It also manages to create the kind of the third line, the rule of thirds line, is around this guy's head and the eyes of the elephant. So again, at this point now, all I have to do is hit generate. Hopefully, it looks like it's going a little bit quicker, and this is going to just fill in a little bit more mud around in front of it as well. And we don't need anything more than that. This is just now about balancing up the picture. And again, I could have gone through and cloned bits of ground around it. No doubt I would have got there eventually. But in terms of time, although, like I said, watching a kettle boil, there we go. How's that? That's just brilliant. Again, that version. I could run them again. With each of these, the dirt's in a slightly different place. I don't quite like little straight lines there. That's pretty good. That one, I quite like that actually. Looks like there's a couple of footprints around, kicking around there. And now we have the picture. And then, now we've got that picture, if I select all, shift copy paste, so we put all that into a final thing here. If I wanted to do one last little run through and maybe vignette it a little bit, just a touch there, lighten up the shadows a touch, and then give it a little touch of clarity, something like that. And then we end up with a slightly more, just adding a little bit more drama into the picture. And that's really the way to do it. The generative fill, the generative expand is without doubt, I think, the easiest way to improve the photo. And this then is, I think, the photo that you wanted to have. And it's because it is, you're right. With that original photo, you're so nearly there. You've got everything else. You've got the elephant at a fantastic angle. You've got the mahout at a wonderful angle with this line coming around the side, the arms out. The lines and shapes in this are really wonderful. It's a great photo. We've got this dramatic sky behind them, all ruined by that wooden bar going across the front, which you couldn't do anything about. So editing, there we go. Hopefully then, Viji, that gives you a few ideas of how to play around with that. Right, so thank you very much, Viji, for sending that one in. Okay, what are a few comments here? April says, that is cool. Meg says, that's absolutely spectacular. Susan says, fabulous, Viji. Elephants are my absolute favourite animal. Nadia says, beautiful image, Viji. John says, congrats, Robert. April says, I just saw Patty the elephant at the Bronx Zoo. Looked like she was smiling. I wouldn't have a clue as to what an elephant smile looks like. Susan says, Kim's working his magic again. And generative fill is amazing. Marilyn also says, a great shot, Viji. Right, okay. So that brings us to pretty much the conclusion. So over the next couple of weeks, first off, I have to hope that Robert, please send me the challenge you can in the next couple of days, because in an ideal situation, if you can send me that, then next weekend, the next podcast, I will run through whatever topic it is that Robert sends in. So if he's wanting to send in the challenge blue, or he's wanting to send in the challenge cactus, whatever it is, then I will dig around and try and give you some ideas of the best way of approaching the topic. Then we'll have another one in between, and then, so 2 weeks after I tell you about it, we'll have the challenge set so that you can then go away, play with it, do your version of it, and then we'll celebrate everybody's different interpretation of the challenge. So that's roughly the plan. The bit in 2 weeks' time, what I will do, I'm not totally sure. Now, I've got half an idea, and you can maybe give me some feedback on it if you either love the idea or you hate the idea. But I do have half an idea about the notion of there's a thing whereby I think sometimes, well, power relationships is what I think I really want to talk about. You see, there's this notion in photography, especially when we're photographing people, okay, that the person with the camera actually has a power over the subject. That with the camera, we can make someone look amazing, or we can make them look ridiculous. And that is a power that you've got to be careful about not abusing, even accidentally abusing, because sometimes when we're out with a camera, there can be a sense of entitlement. Because I've got the camera and there's somebody doing something interesting in front of me, and I'm in a public space where it's all allowed, then somehow I'm entitled to take a photograph of them. But are you? Maybe you might be on a legal level, but are you on a human level? What is it about, when you've got power over someone, you've got to be extra careful about that idea of how you use it. And it's an area that I'm kind of quite keen to explore. So it's possible I might talk about that in a couple of weeks, unless I get a whole bunch of people emailing me going, oh, for good's sake, go. No, steer clear of that. Just show us how to adjust the aperture. Thank you very much. I'm not interested in what you have to talk about the psychology of it. If anybody is particularly interested in the psychology of power relationship in photography, then also let me know, because I think it is a topic. I mean, I've brushed over this topic before, I've touched on it in places, but I've not really gone out into it on depth. But I think it's something that could be interesting. So let me know about that. Oh, we have another person. Lost Astronauta says, great process, protonic greetings from Chile. No idea what protonic greetings is, but there's a thumbs up, an alien head, and live long and prosper. So, thank you very much, Lost Astronauta. Hope you tune in again next week. Right, so thank you very much to Viji for sending in the picture of the elephant to play around with. Thank you very much to Ben and Louisa for allowing me to create a really fun steampunk shoot with them. And thank you, also thank you to Solway Spirits for giving us an excellent place for doing it. And thank you to Andrea as well at DG Life for raising the opportunity, because it would never have happened without it. And thank you to everybody here who's been here live, clicking away, leaving comments, saying hi, giving me feedback. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.